If you guys haven't been here, we started a series called Lies. And the whole focus of the series is trying to understand what are some of the most common and powerful lies in our culture. You being alive and being a teenager means you are in our culture. When I say the culture, I'm just talking about the world around us, especially youth culture, because you guys are bombarded and surrounded by all kinds of really powerful and influential lies. And so there's a lot more than just what we're going to talk about in these few weeks. However, today I want to address one of the more influential and powerful and kind of sinister lies. And I want to start off reading Genesis 1:27. And it says this: in the very beginning, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And so we have this picture in the very beginning of creation. And part of when you study the Bible, one of the things that you learn is that the very first time things are mentioned in the Bible is really important. And if you want to understand something, part of the ways that you interpret the Bible is looking at, well, what was the first mention of it and in what context? And so God creating male and female is really important, and it's going to give us an understanding of these two genders all throughout the rest of Scripture and throughout the rest of history. So he created us in his image. God being infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, amazing, and he could not encompass or chose not to encompass the fullness of who he was in one single person. Adam was not the full representation of who God was. And so it says that in the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them in his image. And so the image of God, who God is, he separated into two genders in the very beginning, male and female. And them two together would reflect what God is like, his nature, his character. Now, we can't do that completely or perfectly, but it was God's design to show the world what he's like through two genders. And them coming together, the Bible says that they would get married, that a man would leave his father and mother, they get together and become one flesh. And that's the basic family unit. That's God's design. That was going to be how he made himself known to all of the world for the rest of time. That's God's design. Now, we talked last week about Satan, who has declared war on God and on his children, wants to corrupt and twist everything that God has set up. And so part of him waging war on God means that he's waging war on you because you were made in the image of God. He does not want you to discover that. He doesn't want you to walk that out or to reflect who God is. He wants to wreak havoc in your life, which is why we have so many really powerful lies in our culture. Jeremiah 1:5, God said to the prophet Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you, I set you apart, and I appointed you a prophet to the nations." So God's speaking to this prophet, and he's like, hey, I want you to know I've been involved since before you existed. I knew you. I knew exactly who I was going to create, and I even knew what I was going to create you for, is what he tells Jeremiah. In Psalm 139, it's a popular psalm you've probably heard, the psalmist is talking to God, and it gives us some insight into God's creation of us. And it says, "You formed my inward parts." And again, he's speaking to God. "You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth." And it says, "Your eyes, God, you saw my unformed substance when I was just a clump of cells. When I was a blob, a blip on an ultrasound, you saw me. And in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." And so what the psalmist is saying is God is involved in all of the process of creating us. He's not absent from it. None of us are an accident that God's like, oh, I was not planning on you being born. Like your parents, gamed the system. That's not like how it works. God is involved in creating every life. Involved at the cellular level. Again, as the psalmist says, like, God, you saw my unformed substance. Before I was born, before I knew a single day of life, you already know my whole life. You know how many days I'm going to be alive on this earth. God's involved in creation. He's involved in intricately creating you. And in there it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God wants to communicate to you his intentionality and involvement in creating who you are. He says, you are wonderfully made. You're not an accident. Nothing about you is. Job 31:15 says, did he who make me in the womb not make him, and the same one create us in the womb? And Job here is talking about people who work for him and why he wouldn't treat them badly. And he says, I know that God created both of us in the womb, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm better than anybody. Again, this distinction in the Bible where God's trying to help you understand he was involved in creating you, even when you were not yet born. The last verse I'm going to read on this is Ephesians 2:10. It says, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. You are God's workmanship. You are God's work of art, and he takes pride in who he's created. He loves you. He says, guys, girls, each of us bear his image in a unique and really beautiful, incredible way. And what Satan has done is he has twisted that idea and gotten our culture to this point where now there's just confusion about males and females that God created and the ways that they reflect God's glory and identity. And so that's the lie I want to talk about today. And it's something that's maybe close to home for some of you who struggle, who don't know the truth. It may hit close to home because you have friends and maybe family members who don't know the truth of this and maybe are deceived by some of these lies. But I want to talk about the transgender craze that is going on. And I use those words intentionally because what is happening in our culture, specifically your culture, has never happened before. It's something that's very distinct, and it's really important for us to talk about, because if I want you to understand truth and lies, this is one of the more really prevalent and powerful lies going around right now. And I don't care how conservative your family is or how sheltered you are from all kinds of things. This is something that's going to be in your face. You're going to hear about it. You're going to experience it. You're going to get to know people who are confused, who don't know this truth. And so I apologize because it's a lot of information, and I'm going to try to talk really fast. I gave you guys note pages so you could try to follow along, and if you miss something, come talk to me afterwards. I expect you might have some questions by the time I'm done. I'm going to hang out, and I'm glad to answer any questions of anything that's not clear. We regularly talk about what does the Bible say, what's good and what's true, and we're going to keep doing that on this topic and helping you understand, guys, girls, the unique things that God created you for. What I want to do tonight is get into just some more practical stuff, because I know when we want to know the answers to things, or when people ask us questions, just saying, well, I heard this Bible verse, or I heard in church one time, is not necessarily a sufficient answer. We need some facts. And what's cool about the Word of God is that it holds up to all scrutiny. All of science and history and everything supports what the Bible says. There's no competition there. And so as we talk about facts, statistics, the reality of this thing, all of it is supporting what God has always said. But I do want to just focus on some of the more practical things. So when I talk about being transgender, here's what I mean by that, in case you don't know. Someone who's transgender is someone whose quote-unquote gender identity doesn't line up with their biological sex. Now, I'm going to put these up here. I don't expect you to necessarily be familiar with these. this is the symbol for female here. This is the symbol for male. That's like generally used. I don't even know where they originated from. Steve can educate me later. However, it's like the universal symbols we use to distinguish. So I could have just written guys, girls, men, women, but this is more interesting. So someone whose gender identity, who they feel like they are inside, doesn't line up with their biological sex. Now, gender is this term that is just thrown around all the time now. Gender was never separate from biological sex. Biological sex has to do with what, like biologically, at a cellular level, what are you? That's very clear from the moment you're born. As a matter of fact, before you're born, when you are a fetus in your mom's stomach, doctors can determine, oh, that's a boy or that's a girl. And then, again, at a cellular level, every part of your life and development is marked differently, distinctly. And so gender has always meant male and female. Up until the 60s, some radical feminists began saying, like, oh, gender was created to try to suppress women. And that's when that term began to be used for some other things, as if it was a social construct or a feeling. But for all of history, from the beginning of time, it's been distinct and understood, oh, there's men and there's women. Now, gender dysphoria, which is a very common term, if you have not heard it, you will hear it, I promise you. Gender dysphoria is this. It's the medical term for the emotional distress that happens when society's expectation of your gender don't match your gender identity. So gender dysphoria is, as a guy, whatever the societal expectations are for guys, if they don't match how I feel or what I think I am, then I would, by definition, be experiencing gender dysphoria. And I'm just going to say that, like, blunt truth about it. Most of the like transgender movement stems from envy of another gender. This is on the part of guys and girls, because what happens is that we think that whatever the other is, anything but what I am, that they, and identifying with them, is going to solve some problems in my life. It's going to change how I feel. It's going to make me happier. It's going to make me more secure. And I want what they have. It's an envious thing. Most often, issues related to this are anxiety, depression, insecurity, that someone thinks, oh, just being something different than whatever I feel like I am is going to be better. I just feel, not great. I feel insecure. And so just being something else is going to be better than how I feel is the temptation. Again, and most of this stems from envy. Proverbs 14:30 says, envy makes the bones rot. The Bible has a lot to say about envy, more than I want to spend focusing on right now. However, God makes clear envy is disastrous to us. Envy hurts our minds, our souls, our bodies. And so the issue is this, and this is why we're talking about it today. You guys are targets of the transgender movement's agenda. All of you are. Just by the fact that you are a young person and you are in America, and especially because you're in California, and especially because you're in San Diego. There's some areas where this is a lot more prevalent and has stronger influence, and unfortunately, this is one of those places. So society is mass marketing to you. Here's why you should be a part of this. That you innately are a part of this, the whole transgender movement, and you just need to recognize it and sign up. And the thing that's so appealing and what makes this movement so powerful and so convincing is because there's a community of people who are who are encouraging you and ready to cheer you on to join them. And it doesn't matter why you're joining them. It doesn't matter what you actually feel like you're suffering from. If you decide you're going to join their ranks, you'll have a bunch of people who are like, yes, like, go you, we have your back, and are going to talk about how much they, quote unquote, like, love you. And especially online now, like, it's a huge online community. And I'm going to get into kind of the influence of that. But I want to bring this up because there's something that's really important for you guys to know. Over here, we have our stereotypical, like, manly man, the guy's guy. Over here on this side, we have just the absolute girly girl. And so I want to ask you girls, what are the characteristics of the perfect girly girl? What is she like? I'm serious. I want to ask. Shh. Guys, you don't need to talk. I want to hear from the girls. Girls, what is the ideal picture of just like a girly girl? Yeah. Okay, polite, proper. Blue-eyed, blonde, maybe. There's certain ideals of beauty. Shh. Hey, stop talking. Stop. There's ideals of beauty in our society. Absolutely, yeah. Like a flower. What do you mean by that? Shh. Hey, if I'm not calling on you, I need you not to talk, please. Yeah.
Kind of like delicate and innocent.
Okay, delicate, innocent. What else? What else is this perfect girly girl like?
Is girly girl like, wait, are you saying girly girls like the epitome of movement?
Yep.
Oh.
What is she like? Guys, I don't want to hear from you. Shh. Girls, what is this ideal picture of what it means to be a girly girl? Okay, we have icons that people view as like the epitome of things. So people like maybe Kim Kardashian, celebrities that are touted as like, oh man, that's the standard of like beauty or whatever I need to get to. Yeah. Okay, girls who are always dressed good, who looks very nice. Anything else? Okay, just beautiful. Maybe focused on their appearance. Any other? Okay, guys, what is the ideal, like the ideal societal standard for just what is a manly man like? Shh. Hey, I don't want to. Shh, girls, this is not your time. Guys, I only want to hear from you if I call on you. Yeah. Respectful. Okay, respectful. Yeah. Okay, working, maybe spending time with their family. Yeah. Strong, protective. What else? What is the stereotypical ideal of what a guy is like? What are those stereotypes? Okay, gentlemanly, maybe. Shh, hey, do not talk, please. What's that? Okay, big muscles. I was a guy in high school. The ideal guy was like really strong, athletic, like had a six-pack and was really smart and had all kinds of people's respect. Worked and provided and had money and was really capable and confident. That was my perception, and it still is very common. Like the ideal guy has all those qualities. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but it is curious. I wonder how many of you girls would say you feel like you are the ideal girl. And I'm curious. I wonder how many of you guys would say, yeah, I feel like the ideal guy. Because here's the truth. Very, very few people can relate or identify with either of those things. I can tell you, high school me was not that. And I felt that. I felt like, man, I would look at other people and be like, man, my friend, one of my close friends at that time was like 6 something, and I was like 5'5". like overweight, super athletic, like jock, who a bunch of the girls liked. And I remember feeling like, he's some kind of different guy than I am. And I'm just like, meh. And what's crazy is I don't care who you are. And I've learned this over years of my own experience with friends of mine and in youth ministry. Even the people that we look at, it could be people in this room, friends you have, who seem like the most put together, who seem like the most ideal girl or guy, they also are playing that same game in their own mind and also feel like, oh man, like I don't have it all together. I'm not as good as so-and-so. And it's true. Like, we're in a season of life when you're a teenager where we're just more insecure. Now, I bring these things up, this dichotomy, because what gender dysphoria does is it uses the most broad stroke to paint what is the most normal experience for all adolescents. So it says this. It says gender dysphoria is when you have distress when you feel like you don't meet society's expectations for your gender. I want to say, I don't know of any young person who has not at some point felt like, man, I'm not as pretty as so-and-so. I'm not as athletic as so-and-so. I'm not as smart as so-and-so. I don't have, this or that. Like, that's the most normal human experience possible. And so what this movement has done is said, hey, if you feel like you're not the most manly man, or if you feel like you're not the most girly girl, it's because you're transgender. It's because if you're anywhere between the spectrum and you're not on the far end of either one, it must be because you are experiencing gender dysphoria, and we're going to tell you how we're going to solve that problem for you. Now, again, who hasn't felt that way? Everybody has felt insecure about something at some point, because we all play this comparison game in our minds, and we always lose at the comparison game. Social media has made that way worse, but if we weren't so quick to categorize and diagnose every single time that we felt like anxiety or depression or obsession or some romantic impulse or some sexual inclination, and every single one of our feelings, good or bad, we would be able to just grow and develop and change, and it would just be like, oh yeah, I remember when I struggled with that, and then I got over it. But our culture is obsessed with focusing on those things and trying to explain to you, oh, here's what that is. Here's why you have that, and here's the solution for it. And so the lie, and we're going to look at a bunch of lies and truths in this area. The first lie is celebrate it, embrace it. If you're confused or think you're trans, you are. Dysphoria is so broad that everyone could feel like they have it. Just by the definition that I just brought up, every single one of us could be like, oh yeah, at some point I felt like I didn't fit the exact mold, or I wasn't as feminine as so-and-so or masculine as so-and-so. It's a dumb thing because everybody's there, but our society wants to be like, oh, well, you have gender dysphoria, and so that means that you're on this transgender spectrum. The thing that they've done, creating this gender spectrum, means that if you are not completely over here, if you're whatever, you could say I fit every single stereotype, but maybe I don't like playing sports like society tells me I'm supposed to as a guy. They create the spectrum. So now it's oh, well, you're here. Well, that must mean that you're 95% masculine and 5% feminine, and you're trans. And if you're a girl and you don't completely fit this mold, and for whatever reason you don't fit some stereotype, then they're like, oh, well, that's probably because you're some certain percentage of masculine. And what's crazy is our society has gone from hey, it's really bad to stereotype. You can't assume, any of these things about people. To what transgenderism is the most sad reduction of gender stereotypes to get you to embrace some identity. It's the worst thing And I'm gonna get into some of those stereotypes, but it's ridiculous. But it's also, I mentioned last week, the enemy is a really clever liar. It's the perfect scenario because as teenagers, this is not any fault of yours. Part of your development is this. Your brains right now are not in a place to calculate risk well. They're not. That's why teenagers are like the most reckless people on the planet. It's not your fault. It's because your brain is still developing that part that helps you to calculate risk and think long term. So making life-altering choices is easy for you right now because you don't fully understand the consequences, which is why you guys are the prime target to be deceived by things like the transgender agenda. This is the reason, by the way, our society knows this, which is the reason why you can't just go get a tattoo right now if you feel like it. It's the reason you can't go buy cigarettes. It's the reason that you can't drink right now. The reason that you can't buy a gun right now is because society knows your brain is not developed enough to handle some serious choices and consequences. So there are these age limits because society knows the longer that they wait, the more your brain's going to develop and you're going to get more responsible. However, they don't do this with this whole transgender agenda. It's completely ignored the fact that your brains are developing and you don't understand the consequences of things long term. They don't care because trans has become this social identity. And it's really sad because in America, throughout history, I'm not talking about just like Christianity, but I'm talking about the American Psychological Association. For all of history, had deemed someone being transgender somebody who is a boy or a girl who in their mind thinks, oh, I'm in the wrong body. I'm supposed to be in a different body. For all of time, that was deemed a mental illness. That was deemed, oh, like there's something going on. There's something hurt or broken in you. You don't understand reality. And it would get treated that way. It would get treated like, all right, we need to help you to cope with the reality of who you are. Because they can tell biologically, oh, you're a male or you're a female. So that's how it's always been until recently. The American Psychological Association changed their vocabulary. And so now they don't even like to use the term gender dysphoria because it sounds negative. And so they're also only allowed to affirm you if you are questioning, if you're unsure, if you feel insecure. They're only allowed to affirm you having a transgender identity. They can't be like, well, what makes you feel that way? And do you think maybe this has something to do with that? Or, is there maybe insecurity tied to that? Or where did this come on? They're not allowed to do that, which is an insane thing. But something I want to focus on too is that gender dysphoria disproportionately, I know you're going to have fun writing that word down, it's up there. It disproportionately affects girls. So girls, you guys are way more susceptible to this lie and the target of this marketing. Guys, you are too, but it's way worse for the girls. And this has become really, really obvious. And I think it's obvious why. Because girls, you guys see and feel the weight of stereotypical societal standards on you. Like I mentioned social media earlier. Social media has made it way, 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 way worse. Because we look at all of these like perfect pictures of people's perfect lives of how they are, and we feel less than. Girls, that temptation is stronger in you to feel like, I don't know that I can meet that standard. That seems ridiculous to maintain that, to do that, to be like that. And so what's happening is that girls en masse are like, this perfect standard seems ridiculous. Like, maybe I'm here, maybe I'm not fully there. And again, society's been like, oh, well, that's because you're transgender. That's because you're not gender conforming, you're something else. And so all these girls are like, well, all right, I guess so. Yeah, I'm not really like that perfect girly girl. I don't meet all these standards. So yeah, maybe I am something different. And it's really sad because, again, God created females, males. He created you in his image. And for all of us, like, it's true, there is a spectrum. There's different gifts and talents and personalities that all glorify God. You know, just looking around this room at some of the adults that are in this room, looking at Steve Jensen here and Ryan Steckler back there and Andy Wills over here, all of us are dramatically different. Our personalities are different. Our interests are different. The way that we carry ourselves is different. And all of us are this image of God that's glorious. And what society would do is be like, well, which one of you guys isn't fitting like that perfect mold? And oh, that's because you're something else. You're not really, a guy. You need to be somewhere else on this spectrum. It's ridiculous. Girls, you don't have one single mold to fit in. And it's perfectly okay. But that does not mean that you need to embrace some lie that says you need to embrace some other identity instead. God's created you guys, male and female, to be a glorious reflection of who he is. No matter who you are or how you feel. And I bring this up too. Some of you guys might be like, okay, well, that's not a struggle for me. That's very clear to me. And I'm glad. But you are going to know and brush shoulders with a lot of people who don't understand this. And I want you to understand, to be able to share some of this truth. Before 2012, there was no scientific literature on girls ages 11 to 21 ever having developed gender dysphoria at all. So about 10 years ago, this basically did not exist among teenage girls. And in most cases, before, around 70% of childhood gender dysphoria, so kids who feel like, yeah, I kind of don't feel like the stereotypical guy, or I don't feel like the stereotypical girl. 70% of the time, that just resolves as they get older and just become more self-aware and understand themselves better. Historically, this transgender deception, it historically only affected 0.01% of the population. That's not the case anymore. Some statistics. Between 2009 and 2017, high school students contemplating suicide increased 25% in those years. The number of teens diagnosed with clinical depression grew 37% between 2005 and 2014. Teenage girls experiencing depression at a rate 3 times higher than boys. So girls, part of the reason why so many girls fall into this transgender thing is because so many of them struggle with other things. And what the transgender lie tells them is this is going to solve your problem. And so it's tempting for girls who are experiencing depression at higher rates. Also, the rates of self-harm reflect the same spike, up 62% since 2009, all among teenage girls. Among preteen girls, rates of self-harm were up 189% since 2010, 3 times what they were 6 years earlier than that. Social media is one of the main reasons. Girls, social media is harming you because you see these ridiculous standards for how people are pretending to live and are like, oh, that's not me. I don't meet that. And it's creating this crazy cycle of depression and self-harm and self-loathing. And so the truth is this: most girls want to flee womanhood, not embrace manhood. And I say this because the whole transgender thing, again, they've created a spectrum. Transgender doesn't just mean that you're a girl who wants to be a boy or that you're a boy who wants to be a girl. They've said now it's anything in between. And the reason why girls are embracing it, it's not because they want to be guys. It's just that they don't want to be a woman because of the perceived pressure there, because they feel like they don't measure up, they're not, whatever enough. And that's why the term non-binary and queer have become so popular. All that means is you don't feel normal. Well, again, that's every single high school student that's ever lived. Every single one of us, especially in our teenage years, has felt like, I don't feel normal. I feel like the weird one. I feel like everyone else has it together and I'm just over here awkward. All of us feel that way. And what they're trying to do is get you to be like, oh, that's because of this identity that you need to embrace. This rejection of who God made you. And you don't have to be the other thing, just be anything else. Because the truth is, only 12% of people who claim to be transgender want surgery to be like a boy. And only 3%, and these are of adults, have gone through to actually have it. The girls struggling with transgenderism, they don't want to be boys. It's just they don't like being girls because they feel like the pressure that's on them and that it's not enough to be who God created them to be. You guys are in the most complicated place you will ever be as far as understanding womanhood and manhood, your own sexuality. Your hormones are doing all kinds of crazy things. Our feelings are going in every single direction, guys and girls. And the world around us is constantly urging us to compare ourselves to everybody else. And we help each other with that. We help to shame and embarrass each other to make ourselves feel better and more normal. And so even before we have like romantic sexual experiences, before we finish developing even sexually, the world is like, you're developing. You haven't even discovered what manhood is like. You haven't even discovered what womanhood is like. You're just in some confused state. And society's like, tell us what you are right now. Make a decision. This is who you are for the rest of your life. Tell us who you are. And people are like, I don't know. I guess I don't feel like this. Like, I don't know what I am. And so people are like, okay, I'm non-binary. I'm queer. I'm whatever new made-up term that we have for it. But here's the truth. Transgenderism is new. They like to spread lies that like, oh, this has been going on from like ancient history and reframing people in the past as being trans somehow. People talking about like, oh, well, Jesus was trans and all kinds of like ridiculous things because they want to make it seem like it's not new and abnormal. They want you to believe it's the most normal thing in the world to accept. However, statistically, looking at the UK, between 2016 and 17, the number of gender surgeries quadrupled. Women accounting for 70% of all gender surgeries. In 2018 in the UK, there was a 4,400% rise in teenage girls seeking gender treatments. All of a sudden, it was like nothing, and then just shot up, and now is this astronomical, prevalent, insane thing. It did not used to be a thing. It did not used to exist. 65% of adolescent girls who discovered transgender identity, quote unquote, out of the blue, did so after a long period of social media immersion. 65% of girls who just all of a sudden are like, you know what, I think I'm this or that, anything other than a woman, happened after this time of just being immersed in social media. That's not surprising. It's absolutely related. And while it affects girls disproportionately, guys, it affects us too. And so the truth is this. Instead of hormones and surgeries, we should try to figure out what else might be wrong or going on. That's the most helpful thing that you could do for someone's life who's struggling, who doesn't understand who they are, who's confused, who feels anxious, who feels depressed. Because treatments are ineffective. There's no evidence that people who transition, that people who get affirmed in some new identity they want to create, there's no evidence that they have decreased rates of depression or suicide, even though that's the narrative. And doctors are needlessly giving these hormone treatments, causing irreversible lifelong damage to young people who are likely to regret it later. Because as they come to their senses and their brains develop, it's going to be like, oh, this was a poor choice. This is a bad idea. And there's a whole demographic now. This has not been around for very long, but there's already a huge demographic of detransitioners, of people who are like, I made a horrible mistake and I've ruined my life. But The transgender community is not like, hey, let's hear these people out. Their stories are important, and maybe, someone might relate to that. The transgender activists are like, boo, transphobes, like, get out of here. Like, you're spewing hate language. These are people who were transgender, who like went through to transition, and the moment that they like decide that they want something different, they're immediately ousted from the trans community who claims to like love and accept them no matter what. And the truth is this, as time goes on, doctors can't report on this, the things that we're talking about. The statistics that I'm citing, by the way, are all from secular sources. They're not like Christian organizations. And if you're curious to know more, come talk to me afterwards. But doctors can't report their studies on transgender lifestyles and how it affects people because all the facts, all the results of them come out looking really bad. All of them come out looking like, oh, transgender treatment really harms people, harms their mental health, harms like long-term, their happiness, their lives. They end up still suicidal and depressed. But they can't say that because if you are a doctor who says that, you're labeled a transphobe, a hater. And there are plenty of doctors, and I'm not talking about conservative Christian doctors. I'm talking about like very, very liberal left-wing scholars who are affirming of transgender people and homosexuality, just being like, hey, these studies look really bad. This looks like maybe we should rethink this, and who get fired from their jobs, who lose their licenses because trans activists are like, you're not allowed to say anything bad about it or you're out. And so nobody wants to do it anymore. A week ago, there's this article that came out of this woman who worked at the Washington University Transgender Center at the St. Louis Children's Hospital. She is by her own admission, she says, I'm one of the most liberal people you'll ever meet. She's married to a transgender man, so has no problems with the transgender movement at all. She worked at this center for youth, where they would help transition young people. And she released this article after quitting her job, and she's one of the first like whistleblowers against the trans movement, which she was a part of for years. And she's like, I see exactly what's happening. She says, when I started, there was maybe 10 calls a month for new patients. And when I left, there were 50 a month. And about 70% of the new patients were girls. Sometimes clusters of girls arrived from the same high school. And this concerned me, but I didn't feel like I was in the position to sound some kind of alarm back then. There was a team of 8 of us, and the only other person who brought up questions about what we saw, whenever we raised doubts, we ran the risk of being called a transphobe. This is a woman who's married to a transgender man. And it said, and the girls who came to us had comorbidities. So she's explaining there's other conditions going on with them. Things like depression, anxiety, ADHD, eating orders, obesity, autism. And so she was saying they brought up like, hey, this seems weird. It seems like there's some really like abnormal stuff going on with everybody who claims to be trans, especially young girls. And she was told to get on board or to get out, along with another colleague asking questions about why they were doing things as shady as they were. And so the truth is this, transgenderism is an epidemic because of its influence. That's why it's grown exponentially out of nowhere. That's why it went from this thing that we like barely hear about to now being prevalent everywhere. Trans influencers are a new thing. If you're on Instagram or you're on TikTok or you're on Reddit or anything like that, there are large communities of trans influencers putting out content to share with you about how much better their life is, to share any negative feelings they felt about being a girl or a guy, which all of us at times feel like, I'm not the most manly man or most girly girl. They're like, oh, being transgender like saved me. I'm so much happier now. And they post videos like showing all these different things that they're doing in their transition. And so that's part of why it's grown so much. Because of social media and the influence of people being like, hey, this is the answer to all your problems. And again, I know that some of you, this is not a struggle, this isn't a thought in your mind, but you need to be able to have conversations with peers and friends who are struggling and under this influence to help them to understand, oh, here's why that's tempting. Here's why that seems appealing, but also the truth about why that's not going to be helpful for them. There are no reliable studies showing that transitioned young people are better off or more happy as adults. All that we have is hearsay from brainwashed people putting content out for their own benefit, their own gain. And it's so new, this whole movement is so new, there's not actually any kind of long-term results. There's no long-term, here's what this looks like years down the road. And even in just this short term, since this has exploded, there's already all kinds of problems and negative effects that, again, anytime any doctors or psychologists bring up, hey, there are some really bad problems with this, they just get shut out and canceled and fired. Because the lie is this: if someone loves you, then they will support you in your trans identity. Again, trans identity just now the spectrum is if you're not fully over here or not fully over there. If you feel slightly insecure, they're like, oh, well, you just must be non-binary, some form of queer that you just like don't fit. And so that's why that's exploded, because who doesn't feel insecure at times? And so again, the lie is, well, if someone loves you, they're going to support you in whatever identity you make up. So parents are made to be enemies, even by doctors, by therapists, by youth culture. Anything set against embracing some false identity is seen as hate speech. Students are, and some of you guys might have experienced this, students are trained and coached to reject their parents and to find some new affirming family. Often online, but there's plenty of places you can do that too. And the society says that's how you'll be happy. Reject your family, reject anybody who tells you this is not a good idea, and then just find some people who are going to embrace you. The lie is, this is who you are. You can never escape it, and the only route is to embrace this identity. And a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people think, I guess this is it. I don't fit over here, so I must be this. And this is who I am for the rest of my life. I guess I just didn't know. I'm so happy someone told me who I am now. And that the only route is to embrace this identity. But the truth is that feeling uncomfortable and insecure is one of the staple feelings of adolescence. And we are learning who we are, every single one of us. And it's okay. It's okay to be confused, to ask questions, and honestly, all of us adults are here because we've like gone through all this process. All of us have like asked hard questions and felt like, we're not this enough and we're not that enough. We just didn't have a society telling us to embrace some other identity because of it. Again, this is a newer thing. Not like we didn't have all kinds of other temptations going on, but this is new and unique. Before this whole transgender craze got a foothold in the world, the top psychologists and doctors in like the field of gender studies, they practiced what they called watchful waiting. And what that meant was this: when someone was struggling and felt like, I don't know that I like really feel like a girl, or I don't know if I really feel like a guy, the top gender psychologists in the world would say, okay, well, like, let's examine why you feel that way. Let's see where that comes from. And they would take time. They wouldn't diagnose anything. They would just wait and let this person unpack things. And statistics show that around 70% of kids who experience gender dysphoria who weren't affirmed or socially transitioned, they didn't accept some new identity and go through this process, 70% of them outgrew it. Now, at least 19 states in our country have banned any mental health professional from second-guessing or questioning someone who has dysphoria. They're only allowed to affirm it. They can't suggest or question anything that would make you doubt that you are not transgender. All they're allowed to do is affirm it and ask you what other steps you want to take. The lie is this, that your life is on the line. And it's a sad lie. When I don't say this like callously, I feel horrible for anybody who struggles in this way or has believed this lie because they believe their life is on the line. Because all of the rhetoric says you got to do whatever it takes, hide whatever you need to, lie to whoever you need to get the life-saving care that you need to be affirmed as a transgender person. Because if you don't, you're probably going to kill yourself. That's the rhetoric. If you don't embrace this, you're probably going to kill yourself. And they tell parents, if you don't embrace this, your kid is probably going to kill themselves. And what it does is it puts this idea in young people's minds of oh, I guess that's my only other option. It's like holding someone emotionally hostage. Dead naming, which is calling someone by their old name when they want to make up a new name for themselves, or misgendering them when they feel like they're a different gender, you don't call them that, is now seen as hate speech and violence. Because it's not enough that someone might be struggling with reality, struggling to feel like, I don't know that I'm a girl, or I don't know that I'm a guy. Now society says you have to affirm even, whatever what we would call a mental illness years ago, society says you have to affirm it. If you don't, you're causing violence against them. And again, they might kill themselves and it'll be your fault. The truth, again, is that no studies show any kind of improved long-term mental health benefits of transitioning. None. As a matter of fact, in 2019, there was a transgender clinic in the UK, and they did a study, and they found that the rates of suicide and self-harm didn't decrease after they gave all these young people treatments. They gave them puberty blockers and things to try to help them become the gender that they feel like. And they found none of that stuff went down. Nobody felt any better or got any better. So much so that the governor of that clinic resigned after the study because he realized all we're doing is hurting kids and giving them disastrous side effects. In 2014, the Williams Institute study showed that 41% of transgender adults dealt with self-harm and suicide attempts. 41% of them. That's an insane statistic. That's 4 out of every 10. You would think that transitioning would be the answer, like society is saying it is, but it's not. They're hurting, they're broken, and that does not solve their problems. The lie is this, and you guys will hear this if you haven't already, that old school traditional gender norms are evil and we're past that. Society says, oh, this is horrible. This is some creation of some perverse masculinity. Oh, this is ridiculous. Biblical gender roles are reductive and horrible and subhuman and evil. They say there's not only 2 genders. You don't have to identify as that or that. You could be anything in between. Society says the only cisgender means you identify completely as a guy or completely as a girl. The only cisgender options are that you're either a super girly girl or some jock, and if you aren't, then you're probably trans. That's our society's thing right now. But the truth is that scientifically there is no evidence for that. Every single thing about our biology, our makeup, everything that we understand scientifically shows there are 2 genders. That's it. Identifiable from the womb and every moment of our lives. We have different builds, brain activity, reproductive system, strengths. And I don't know if you guys know this, but every single cell of your body speaks to the fact that you are a guy or a girl. They could take any cell of your body and determine, oh, that's a boy or that's a girl. It's imprinted on every single part of you. It's also ironic that if you get gender reassignment surgery, you can only pick one of 2 genders. There's nothing else on the spectrum for you to pick. Because we know there's 2 options, as much as we love to say there's everything in between. And so there's insane harm in this. I'm not going to be able to go through all of it. The rest of your notes list some of the harm when you begin taking puberty blockers. When they, for a guy, if you feel like a girl, they'll give you estrogen, which jacks up your body and gives you all kinds of long-term, lifelong bad health effects. They're bad side effects. If you're a girl who feels like a guy or doesn't feel like you want to be a girl, they'll give you puberty blockers and then testosterone, which jacks up your body. Because again, our God uniquely created our bodies to function certain ways and do certain things. And trying to override how God designed you only hurts you. Everything shows that. All of the side effects are this example of, oh, that's not natural. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not what you're supposed to have. That's not how that's supposed to develop. So things like cancer and heart attacks and high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, all these things are all these like get invited into your life when you decide, I'm not going to accept how God created me. I'm going to try to be something else. A couple last things. Women are hurt more than anyone else by this trans agenda. And it's true. Some of the information's on your sheet. Transgenderism has become a cult. It's become a cult because it's so radical, and they say this, you're either all in or you're completely out. You have to follow every single belief that they have. If you doubt, or even if you're trans, but you decide, I don't know if I want to be trans anymore, you're out. You're an enemy. You're cut off. It's cancel culture at its finest. The lie is that you can safely try it out and then back out if it's not for you. Some of you guys might have friends who have been told this or believe this, like, oh, well, you can just, you can take this, you can just like try this for a time, but then if you change your mind, totally fine, you can do that. That's not true. The truth is that chemically interfering with your body's development has serious consequences. And again, the rest of this is just information explaining some of those consequences. But this is, you guys, this is part of our culture now. This is part of the culture that you live in. Even if you're homeschooled, this is going to be all around you. We're taught this, public schools, this is really rampant. Even from preschools now. I have a few books up here I'm not going to read that are kids' guides to gender identity. And again, it's just like, pick a stereotype, and if you don't fit it, it's because you're trans, and here's how you embrace this identity. It's insane. And I wanted to focus on this tonight because I know I've talked for a long time. It's a lot of information. You guys need to know this. This is all around you. I want you to know for your own sake, so that when you struggle and feel like, man, I don't fit some norm, to know that's okay. That's just part of being a teenager. And God uniquely created you, loves you, and has a purpose for you. I also want you to know, because you're going to have friends, and some of you already do, who struggle, who don't know this truth, who don't understand the harm that this is going to do to their life. And I want to equip you with some information to lovingly share with them and to help them learn some of the truth. If you guys have questions, I'm going to be hanging out here afterwards. Seniors, if you guys want to go to that snow day, you guys need to pay. Lauren is in the back, ready to handle that for you. And if you guys wanted to buy food next week, we're going to have In-N-Out burgers, Chick-fil-A sandwiches, Costco pizza before group at 6:15. You guys can pre-buy that stuff tonight so that we have it guaranteed for you next week. You guys can do that back there with Lauren. She can take cards and Venmo or cash. So do that before you guys head out. I'm going to pray. We're over time. If your parents are waiting for you, go get them. And I'm going to hang out if you guys have questions. Shh, let me pray. Lord, thank you for who you created us to be. I know that not all of us fully understand that yet. We don't fully understand what it means to be made in your image, to reveal your glory to people. Help us. Help us to embrace, God, the fact that you knit us together in our mother's womb, that you were intentional about each one of us, that you didn't make a mistake. I pray that we would, Lord, walk with a security in knowing that we are sons and daughters of the King of the universe. Pray, God, for just a sense of your love, that we would walk in confidence in who we are in you, and that we would be a light to this broken world, and that we'd be able to not only defend ourselves against the lies of this culture, but also to help our friends to see and to understand the truth and love. So, Lord, be with us, anoint us to represent you well. In your name, amen.